I'm sincerely hopeful and prayerful that he is completely innocent of the allegations that have been levied against him. I can't sit here and speak to his innocence or guilt.
High-profile names are speaking out as NFL Hall of Famer and First Take analyst Shannon Sharpe steps away from ESPN temporarily in the wake of a $50 million rape and sexual assault lawsuit. Sharpe, who adamantly denies the allegations, called them false and disruptive in a social media statement released just as disturbing audio clips began making the rounds online. I'm going to break down what this move signals for his legal battle ahead and what celebrities are saying as the story continues to unfold. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. Shannon Sharpe, the Hall of Fame tight end, ESPN's First Take analyst, announced he is stepping away from the network temporarily after a Nevada woman filed a $50 million lawsuit accusing him of rape and sexual assault. Sharpe announced his decision to step away in a social media statement where he called the allegations false and disruptive, insisted that their relationship was, quote, 100% consensual. ESPN backed this decision, though, to take a break, calling the situation, quote, serious. Now, Sharpe's statement that was posted on his Instagram account on April 24th reads in full, quote, "My statement is found here, and this is the truth. The relationship in question was 100% consensual. At this juncture, I am electing to step aside temporarily from my ESPN duties. I will be devoting this time to my family and responding and dealing with false and disruptive allegations against me. I plan to return to ESPN at the start of the NFL preseason. I sincerely appreciate the overwhelming and ongoing support I have received from my family, friends, and colleagues." And following Sharpe's departure, as I mentioned, ESPN released its own statement supporting that decision. A spokesperson for the sports conglomerate wrote, "This is a serious situation, and we agree with Shannon's decision to step away." Now, this move comes on the very same day that the NFL draft kicked off and in the midst of the highly anticipated return of the 2025 preseason. But the controversy has already cast a shadow over his career and, by the way, a rumored reported $100 million podcast deal, which we're going to talk about as well. Amidst all these claims, there have been some high-profile names who have come out to express their thoughts on the allegations. And we're going to get into what was said and who said what, because some of these responses may even surprise you. But in case you haven't been following this, if you need a little refresher here, this is an incredibly tumultuous legal battle that Sharpe is now wrapped up in. You have this woman, who we're choosing not to name, by the way, even though it appears Shannon Sharpe and his legal team identified who she was. But you have this woman who has brought forth a lawsuit against the analyst alleging that she was in a relationship with him that began consensually back in 2023, but then turned very ugly. And that lawsuit that was filed on April 20th alleges that Sharpe raped this woman twice in October of 2024 and once in January of 2025. Key claims include, and I want you to brace yourself here because these are very disturbing allegations, that Sharpe raped her while she sobbed and ignored her pleas to stop, that he recorded her without her consent and shared videos with others, and that he even threatened her. There was an audio clip that was released by this woman's attorney, and if you've been watching a lot of Sidebar, you'll recognize the name, Tony Busby, capturing the voice of a woman whom attorneys identify as the woman suing Shannon Sharpe, telling him not to manipulate her, where a man's voice, resembling Sharpe's, can be heard saying, "If you say that word one more time, I'm going to bleep and choke the bleep out of you when I see you." And the woman, allegedly the plaintiff in this case, then can be heard saying she doesn't want that, while the voice resembling Sharpe responds, "Yes, you do. I don't think you have a choice in the matter." And this is all important because Sharpe's team is not only denying the allegations, but they're firing back, calling this whole thing a shakedown, arguing that anything that did happen was entirely consensual. In fact, here's part of Sharpe's response that he posted to his Instagram page with a pretty serious promise to fight back in court.
"This is a shakedown. That video should actually be 10 minutes or so. Hey, Tony, instead of releasing your edit, put the whole video out. I don't have it, or I would myself. You know what happened, and you're trying to manipulate the media. The encounter in question took place during the day at her invitation, and now that appears to be a deliberate setup. What they're getting is sued for defamation and trying to take me down. My career is all about real talk and honesty. I know my family and fans know exactly what this is about, and I'm going to be out there telling you whatever I need to say, just like I always do. I love all you guys." Thanks.
And we know that this was coupled with Shannon Sharpe's team releasing text messages from this woman, or appearing to come from this woman. We did a Sidebar episode on that as well. But what has even been suggested is that Tony Busby was going to release a portion of a sex tape, and Shannon Sharpe encouraged, release the whole thing, release the full tape. Hey, just want to give a shout out to Morgan & Morgan for sponsoring today's Law and Crime YouTube takeover. Now, Morgan & Morgan is a firm with over 1,000 attorneys. You know why they have so many? Because they win a lot. In the past few months, Morgan & Morgan secured a $9.3 million verdict for a car crash victim in Florida, a $5.6 million verdict for another car accident victim in Atlanta, and not to mention $1.8 million in Kentucky after insurance offered them a mere $5,000 in that case. And even if you think your case isn't worth millions of dollars, why not start a claim and fight for what you deserve? You can start a claim from your phone in just 8 clicks. The whole process can be done from your phone. So if you're hurt, visit forthepeople.com/YouTube takeover. Click the link below or scan the QR code on screen. Now, before we go into this any further, I want to bring on a guest to talk about this. I'm joined by Jeremy Evans, a sports, entertainment, and media attorney. I mean, who's more perfect than Jeremy to talk about this? Jeremy, thanks so much for taking the time. Let's start off with his decision to step away from ESPN. From a law perspective, a media law perspective, him stepping away temporarily, is that a wise decision both for him and the network? And how could it be that he actually returns?
So, Jesse, pleasure to be with you, and thanks for having me on. Honored to be with you. I think a lot of these times you have to go back to what the contract says between the talent and the studio or the network. And, I don't know if there was a morals clause or some sort of brand reputation clause that they might be looking at or dealing with. So that's something to keep in mind. But I think in terms of him stepping away, I always like to compare these situations to how past actors have sort of done with this. Look at the Trevor Bauer situation, the allegations that came out against him. And I think the best thing to do for Shannon was to step away. I think this is a time for him and his team to reflect. I think it's unfortunate that it had to happen on an NFL draft day. That happens to be one of the major subjects that he talks about on ESPN. So I definitely think he has the ability to come back, but I think one of the problems with stepping away voluntarily as opposed to being sort of forced out is that it does in some sense jeopardize the contract negotiations. I think it sort of puts a halt on a lot of things that he could be doing. But I think that also sort of highlights the seriousness of the allegations.
Do you think it also matters that this is a Disney-owned property? They own 80% of it. Do you think that matters?
I think so. I think, Disney is still recognized as a family brand. Even though I don't know if the average, sort of person would connect Disney with ESPN. I mean, business folks, of course. I don't think the average sort of child or maybe parent would recognize that. But that being said, it does matter. Disney is still sort of known as a family company, and this is one of their products. I think another thing to think about is, there was talk for quite some time about spinning off ESPN. And this might sort of engage those discussions again as well.
Well, here's the thing. Again, if he had consensual sex with her, kinky, whatever, it's not against the law. It's totally fine. But for someone to have a career as a public face of, a sports company like this, right? And you look at the audio tape that was released or text messages or whatever might else be released during the course of this, how could ESPN take him back? I mean, in the sense that, yes, he's a grown adult to arguably consensual people. Let's just assume that for a moment, right? And nobody's saying that the audio tape, we're not 100% sure it's him. It seems like it's him. How would the company be able to take him back knowing all that stuff's out there?
Right. It's a great question, because you look at the Trevor Bauer situation that occurred, and even though he was proved, through different court iterations, through administrative hearings, to have had consensual sex and had not sort of done anything wrong, I think ultimately his actions on the field and sort of his combative nature, right or wrong, was sort of what did not allow him to come back to play baseball, right? And with Shannon Sharpe, I mean, this may be one of those things where if you were to watch his pod and some of the guests he has on, I think it's some of his best work in terms of him being sort of entertaining and funny. And it may just be that he sticks with the podcast. And the podcast would, by the way, pay him more than what he's getting with ESPN. So to your point, maybe it is that he doesn't come back to ESPN and he focuses on the podcast. And
well, do you think the timing of this is interesting with the reported $100 million podcast deal?
I do. And there may be something to that as to sort of where the money's coming from. I would also say, too, that it's not surprising because anytime in litigation, you're always looking for the deep pockets. And I'm not a litigator, but that tends to be the case.
Interesting. Okay, so now I want to talk a little bit more about the public figures who have begun weighing in on this. And the responses range from staunch defenses to what appears to be cautious skepticism, maybe. I think that's a fair way to articulate it. So I'm going to start with a big one, okay? This is Stephen A. Smith. This is Shannon Sharpe's First Take co-host in a 20-minute video that was titled My Thoughts on the Shannon Sharpe Situation that was posted to his YouTube channel on April 22nd. Smith appeared, what I would say, conflicted on the allegations against someone that he referred to as a close friend, appearing to express discomfort with Sharpe's legal team releasing explicit text messages along with the accuser's name.
Going on the offensive to defend himself, I completely understand where Shannon Sharpe is coming from. On the other hand, when his legal team issued out the press release on X yesterday, and they spoke about, they mentioned her name, and they revealed some of those explicit text messages, that was uncomfortable.
And he even said he's not sure that's going to work. But in the end, he hoped for Shannon Sharpe's innocence.
It's a sad situation. Shannon Sharpe is somebody I work with a couple of days a week. Shannon Sharpe is somebody that I brought to ESPN. We've grown close as friends. I'm sincerely hopeful and prayerful that he is completely innocent of the allegations that have been levied against him. I can't sit here and speak to his innocence or guilt.
And it's also worth mentioning that Smith addressed Sharpe's frustration with attorney Tony Busby's history, his history of what they say arguably targeting high-profile cases against black men, namely the civil suit that was dropped against Jay-Z, but we also know that he's represented claims against Sean Combs, Deshaun Watson. So, Jeremy, back to you. When you listen to that, could Stephen A. Smith's arguable discomfort over Sharpe's legal team releasing explicit texts and naming the accuser, your thoughts on that tactic, and could that have legal implications for ESPN or Shannon Sharpe?
So it's such an interesting point in question. I guess two things. The first is I sort of look back at, if you may recall, the audio that was released by Shannon Sharpe, and it was sort of like a sex tape audio. And that occurred with, I would say, year. I don't know how that was released or why that was released, but that was something that came out and was talked about. And so, again, that's an interesting little caveat in the background where in people's minds are already thinking about this. And then these allegations come out. So that's not going to help him in that regard. I think with Stephen A. Smith's response, it's calculated. And I'm sort of reminded of this quote by Abraham Lincoln where he would say, stand with anyone that's right and stand with him when he's right and then part with him when he goes wrong. And I think that Stephen A. Smith has always been calculated. As his colleague and as his friend, I'm not sure I would have released that statement, or maybe I would have just done a written statement and maybe no comment or something like that. It does seem to sort of muddy the waters a little bit, to your point, because it adds more questions than answers. And again, the fact that they're colleagues at ESPN could provide for some issues as the litigation moves forward. And those are statements that potentially could be used.
He was clear he had no knowledge of any of this. He had no part in any of this, and he's just basing it off of the reporting. I guess it goes to a larger question of, and I mentioned this the other day, I call it the Blake Lively, Justin Baldoni situation. It's basically the playbook. You release everything for the public. You release all these messages. You out your accuser. I don't know if the ethics of that, and I wonder if it could help him legally, maybe put pressure on this lawsuit to drop or to make sure that he maintains public favorability. But obviously those messages could complicate a legal case for her, clearly, if we're talking about what happened. Just generally speaking, though, do you agree with his idea that, I don't know if I would have done that, release everything, including naming her, which I thought was interesting too, or seemingly naming her?
Yeah. No, and good point, Jesse, because I think that anytime, one of the ethical responsibilities as a lawyer is that you have a duty to the tribunal, a duty to the court, and to have this ability to where you're very careful about how you speak outside of the courtroom and, how you prep for trial. All those things matter. So to your point, I don't know if it's the greatest strategy. This is such an interesting case because on one hand, to your point, it's not illegal to have sex in your bedroom and the choice of how you want to do that. But, anytime you put this stuff out in public, I just don't know if that's the best strategy. And or the other issue is, your ethical duties, as a lawyer. So which I think Stephen A. Smith, highlighted.
So let's take a look at another high-profile perspective, and this one is from Charlemagne the God. So on the April 23rd episode of his podcast, his show, The Breakfast Club, he suggested that Sharpe's choices in the past appeared to contribute to his current situation.
Destiny's not a matter of chance, it's a matter of choice. And all of this is happening because it seems like Shannon Sharpe made some poor choices. And being 54 at the time, hollering at a 19-year-old, is a very poor choice. Mm-hmm. Okay. It is what it is. Yeah. Yes, it's a shakedown, but people can't shake you down unless you give them something to shake.
Now, Charlemagne in that clip is referring to the age gap that's present between Sharpe, who's 56, and the plaintiff, who's now 20 years old. Okay. Now, Jeremy, does Charlemagne suggesting that Sharpe's choices contributed to this situation, specifically the large age gap? Does that have any legal relevance in this case? I mean, he says it's a shakedown, but can't be a shakedown unless you give them something to shake.
Right. I don't think so. I mean, this is sort of the age-old thing. I mean, there's sort of been many examples of sort of older men dating younger women, and there seems to be a mutual attraction there, consistent across relationships. But I will say this, and this is where I think the legal issue may go, is sometimes the power imbalances in relationships. And so that may become a concern as this case moves forward, is this sort of issue of him being older, more powerful, having more money. But I also think, to Charlemagne the God's point, it's also this issue of how much information Shannon Sharpe does put out in terms of about his relationships when he does interviews. Obviously, the past audio tape that came out. These things are not going to help his case. And, and I happen to like Shannon Sharpe. I think, he's a great analyst, and I wish him all the best. And, I hope that these allegations are not true.
I just wonder if it'll affect the jury, right? Just the perception of that. Could that turn them against him?
Agreed.
Okay, I want to take a look at something else. Now, this one is from the rapper Boosie Badazz. And he took to X on April 22nd with a series of inflammatory tweets regarding the allegations. In one post he wrote, "She heard he was about to get that $100 million. This is in reference to that rumored podcast deal that we mentioned earlier. I'm sick of these bleeps. They be knowing they can probably get a couple million to make it go away." So, Jeremy, got a point here? I mean, could public suggestion that the accuser is targeting Shannon Sharpe for financial gain, could that be a key point here? I mean, the timing of this lawsuit is quite interesting.
So, great question. And I think to your point earlier about juries may affect a jury in terms of how they view something or whatnot. But that being said, they're going to be instructed by the judge as to what facts they can look at. I think what really matters on the legal side is what do the facts say? And if there's enough facts there to show that the element of the claim has been proved, then ultimately that's sort of where it would land. So I think from a sort of media standpoint, it matters, public sort of relations, it matters in terms of the timing of this. Clearly does not look good for the alleged victim. But that being said, I don't think it's going to matter much in terms of the legal aspect of it.
Well, let me ask you this. In terms of public sentiment, again, going back to Baldoni and Lively, a lot of people have opinions about that case. I'm curious what people's opinions will be of this. Let's say, for example, if you see a large segment of the population, large amount of celebrities just side with Shannon Sharpe on this, Could that influence the decision to move forward with the lawsuit? I'm curious about what the public response and the response in the industry, how that might affect the progression of a lawsuit.
Absolutely. So two points on that, or 1 point, but sort of two divisions. The first is, prior to going to trial, this could absolutely have an effect, because the alleged victim could be looking at this with her counsel and saying, wow, the public opinion is against us. This is a lot of pressure to deal with. Let's settle this case and move on, which is probably what all parties will end up doing. I don't think they want this to go to trial or to have any more facts or anything else out there, right? This is definitely, crisis management from that standpoint. However, the split would be, once it goes to trial, it's really just about the facts of the case. And the fact that Shannon Sharpe may or may not be looking at a $100 million podcast deal is not going to have an effect on whether or not the things that are being alleged were committed.
Well, in that same vein, we heard from psychologist and social commentator Dr. Umar Johnson came out in defense of Shannon Sharpe, voicing his support for the podcaster, the analyst, and this was during an Instagram live stream.
I'm standing with Uncle Shannon because I don't like when black men get taken down. Uncle Shannon Sharpe is my brother. I'm standing with Uncle Shannon Sharpe until the facts prove otherwise.
And he also said he believes this whole thing is a scam. Now, Jeremy, does Dr. Johnson publicly calling the case a scam raise any red flags for you?
No, I think this is something that you see on with every ethnicity, with every color, with every person. This is something that you see when you deal with money. You're going to have people that are going to come forward and allege certain crimes or certain civil issues or whatever litigation. But that being said, it is something that we see more and more in this day and age with social media. So I think, to me, it really just comes down to the facts. And of course, if it goes to trial, it will come down to that. But I think prior to that, to your point, and maybe to some of the points of a lot of the celebrities who've been weighing in, if this doesn't go to trial, it will come down to public opinion. And ultimately, I think the parties will make a decision based on public opinion.
And let's finish this up with the idea of public opinion, because we got a response from one more person I want to address. This one is from the rapper Cameron. And during the April 23rd episode of It Is What It Is, he also appeared to offer a conflicted take, saying on one hand that the accuser may have baited Shannon Sharpe into compromising situations to get some money from him because he's well known.
When you have this newfound success, you got to know how to move, especially with the you got to know how to move, man, because they all, I'm not saying niggas don't with you, but they want something.
But on the other hand, he also criticized Sharpe's attempt to settle the case.
Now, when you're trying to settle out on the low, it's a little bit of guilt there. Something happened. Not saying it wasn't consensual. Maybe you offered the money because you like, look, I ain't got time. I just need this to be swept under the rug so I can get back to work and do what I got to do in between these deals. But I do know that it don't look good when you try to give somebody a couple dollars to sweep it under the rug.
Yeah, Jeremy, that's an interesting point, right? So it is worth mentioning that Sharpe's attorney, Lonnie Davis, had previously reported and came out that his client offered this woman $10 million to settle privately, and it was the rejection of that offer that led to this filing. And I'm not surprised by that, because how quickly they had all of those text messages ready to publish made it seem they knew this was coming. Does he have a point, Cameron, that like if you settle this, if you were about to settle this, it makes it look like you're guilty of something? Or maybe I should say liable for something?
Yeah, no, I don't think so. I think ultimately it's a crisis situation, right? The thing that you want is to put more information out in public and or to extend the matter longer than it has to be. I think this sort of highlights the power of non-disclosure agreements in relationships and why a lot of celebrities do them. It sort of highlights this point that ultimately these parties need to sort of put themselves in the best position possible. And I don't think anything to do with the negotiation would sort of harm that or harm anything towards trial. But I think it's just an issue of they don't want this to go on any longer. And they probably had, I imagine what happened, there was probably private conversations going on between Shannon Sharpe and this woman. And then they could not come to an agreement, or they brought the lawyers in. And then ultimately it was like, okay, we're going public with this. So it does not surprise me that, ultimately, I mean, people all the time now will take screenshots of texts and keep records of things, and we have the phones and all the technological capabilities to do that now. So I wouldn't put too much stock into that, other than to say the parties couldn't come to a deal, and then they decided to go public.
I think a lot of people think about a radically different situation, but I think a lot of people look at what happened with Sean Combs, right? He didn't settle that case with Cassandra Ventura. She ends up filing the lawsuit. Then they settle. Everything blew up. Okay, very different situation. Very different. And by the way, Shannon Sharpe's not facing any criminal charges. Okay, now there is one more update in this case I want to get into, and this is Shannon Sharpe's team claims, of course, that all of this was consensual, that it was set up at the accuser's request. And we now have further claims being reported on this by TMZ, and this could maybe affect the case. So according to multiple sources who spoke to TMZ Sports on April 24th, Sharpe and the woman, who is apparently an OnlyFans model, engaged in what they described as a strictly physical, consensual BDSM relationship. Those sources, all unnamed by the way, so take it with a grain of salt, claim that the two met about 100 times for sexual encounters in Los Angeles and Nevada, all of which allegedly involved role-playing, choking, bondage, a lot allegedly at her request. And the sources even provided text messages that are a little too vulgar to be repeated here. But of course, Tony Busby, who's representing this Jane Doe, fired back at these claims, calling all of this, including Sharpe's defense, ridiculous. He said in a statement to TMZ Sports, "Someone should tell Mr. Sharpe that when you're digging yourself a hole, it would be smart to stop digging. The filed complaint and audio speaks for itself." And Busby also pointed to a text message from January 2025 that read, "I don't care what our history is, no means no, Shannon." And this is purportedly from the alleged victim in this case. Busby continued his statement saying, as you can clearly see from the text released by Mr. Sharpe's team, no means no, no matter what has occurred before. And that's the central issue here, right, Jeremy? You listen to these sources, you hear what Shannon Sharpe has to say. It's complicated, right? Because they could have been in a completely consensual, kinky, role-playing BDSM relationship. But if at one point she says no and he continues, and there's at least one text message maybe suggesting that, does all of this not matter?
Well, I mean, there's definitely some rules and policies and laws with regard to, bringing in sort of outside evidence or evidence going towards habit or consistent behavior. So in that sense, it does matter. But I think, Jesse, I would probably highlight the point that in terms of like a textbook response, right? I think the better pathway for Sharpe would have been remove himself from the situation, don't become the center of the highlight for actions beyond what you do on the show. And so I think he was right in that. But the sort of idea that you're releasing more information and you're putting text out there and you're trying to make the alleged victim look bad, I just don't think that helps with public opinion. I think the better pathway would have just been to say, I deny all allegations, and we would be going through the legal process. As hard as it is to do that, I think unfortunately we live in this social media world where there's sort of this need for more and more information and wanting to defend yourself. So I understand the plight of the situation and I get it, but it's also maybe not the best approach to defending yourself.
Does it give you a sense of who he may be calling as witnesses for his side? If you're hearing these unnamed sources, we don't know who they are, but does it give you a sense of he might have witnesses who'll testify that this was a completely consensual relationship? And then it becomes a question about their credibility and their connections, but doesn't that, kind of give us a sense?
I think so. And I think, he is a celebrity. He is a well-known person. And I think also if you look at Shannon Sharpe's past podcast and shows, he's definitely been willing to talk about his sexual relationships. And so that's something that I'm sure that he has conversations with his friends. He's clearly doing it in public. So I agree. I think this is definitely where he's going to be getting his source of information in defense.
Jeremy Evans, thank you so much for taking the time and talk about the latest on this case. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Jesse. Honor to be with you.
And there you have it, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us here on Sidebar. As always, please subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Jesse Weber. I'll speak to you next time.